In the hidden hollows of southeastern Kentucky, where the wind doesn't howl, it listens, there lies a graveyard that was never meant to be found. No official maps, no wooden signs, just rows of infant graves buried beneath wild hemlock and silence. Locals call it the Garden of Purified Angels, but they whisper it, because everyone who knows the name also knows the curse. From 1834 to 1859, 156 children vanished into that dirt, not by war, nor disease, nor famine, but by hands that called themselves holy. Margaret, Catherine, and Agnes Morrison, three sisters, midwives, healers, saviors to hundreds. But behind their cabin doors, under candlelight and scripture, they became something else entirely. They weren't delivering babies, they were selecting souls, judging purity by skin, deformity, or birthmark, declaring some infants too corrupted by sin to live. What they did was never supposed to surface. It stayed hidden for 150 years, until a mason restoring their old homestead broke through a false wall and uncovered the journals. This isn't just a story of madness. This is about what happens when righteousness rots. And if you keep watching, just know this. Truth like this, it stains. Once you hear it, you'll never be clean again. The journals were bound in weathered leather, sealed tight by time and mold. 47 volumes, each labeled not by month or year, but by the word purification. Inside, the script was elegant, precise, too calm for what it described, page after page detailing infant deaths, each justified with scripture, visions, divine instruction. This was not insanity, this was doctrine. Margaret Morrison wrote like a prophet. She believed she was chosen, not just to assist birth, but to cleanse the world of what she called spiritually tarnished vessels. Infants born with wine-colored stains, crooked fingers, or sunken eyes, marks she believed were not human, but infernal. Catherine recorded the rituals, each child's traits, the prayers spoken before death. Agnes illustrated the graves, small ink sketches of flowers, crosses, symbols. She called it the garden. They all did. What drove them wasn't hatred, it was certainty. They believed they were saving the world, one child at a time. That by ending a life, they were sparing generations from corruption. The townspeople never suspected. The sisters cried with the mothers, prayed over coffins they filled, offered healing herbs with one hand, while covering cold graves with the other. They wore compassion like a mask, and beneath it, righteous murder. The Morrison cabin sat on a ridge above the Cumberland River, a modest two-story home cloaked in vines and sermons. Beneath its humble exterior, it was a sanctum of silence. The lower floor, a birthing room lined with surgical tools and scripture. The upper floor, that was the prayer room, the place they believed heaven touched earth. At dawn, they prayed. At dusk, they purified. Every evening, Margaret would recite from Revelation, while Agnes lit candles shaped like infants. Catherine, the practical one, kept the grave records. There was no randomness, no panic. Every death was logged with precision, weight, deformity, time of birth, and what mark revealed the child's corruption. But their transformation didn't happen overnight. It began with whispers, a flicker of doubt during birth, a scripture interpreted too literally, and then a decision made in desperation that felt too easy to repeat. What terrified them wasn't death, it was the idea that evil could begin at birth, that hell could inherit the flesh of a child. They weren't killing babies, they believed they were striking at ancient forces hiding in swaddling cloths. And the more they acted, the more God, or something wearing his face, seemed to speak louder. Whispers that soon became commandments. February 1834. The first purification. The Mackenzie child. They never forgot him. Not because he cried differently, most did. Not because his birth was hard, most were. But because of the mark, a deep burgundy stain stretching from his temple to his cheek, jagged like a handprint. Agnes saw it first under lamplight. "It's shaped like claws," she whispered. Margaret stared into it like a mirror, and in that moment, her years of scripture, isolation, and self-righteous discipline snapped into place. "This child," she said, "is marked." Sarah Mackenzie, the mother, lay unconscious from blood loss. Her husband, Thomas, pacing outside in the snow, trusting the women who had delivered half the county. He never knew, not that night. Margaret placed her hands gently over the infant's nose and mouth. She prayed, not for forgiveness, but for strength. The baby's cries faded into silence. They buried him behind the cabin that same night, a small wooden cross. No name, just a single word etched with a nail, redeemed. In the journal, Margaret wrote, "He was chosen, claimed by darkness, returned to light." That night, something shifted. They didn't mourn. They felt called. The first grave didn't haunt them. It sanctified them. Something happens when you cross the line between healer and executioner. If you do it in God's name, the guilt doesn't come, only clarity. That's what the Morrison sisters learned in the weeks after the Mackenzie child. They expected punishment, a storm, a sickness, a sign of divine wrath, but none came. Instead, their herbs grew richer, their patients healed faster, their fame spread. The community praised them as angels. That's when Margaret became convinced. God wasn't silent. He was pleased. They refined the ritual. Catherine started calling it the mercy. Agnes drew angel wings beside each journal entry. They built a second prayer room, underground, hidden beneath floorboards. There, they kept relics, locks of hair, cloth stained with blood, small bones wrapped in muslin, each a soul spared from corruption. They called it the Vault of Innocence. But they didn't just wait for marked children. They began watching, studying pregnancies, reading signs in dreams, in weather, in a mother's voice. Margaret claimed to feel darkness growing in the womb. If a child kicked too much, if a mother confessed fear, they took it as divine warning. They weren't reacting anymore. They were hunting, and no one, not husband, priest, nor grieving mother, ever saw the truth. By spring of 1835, the sisters' work had evolved into something far more deliberate, almost surgical. They created classifications: the touched, the marred, the vessel. Each label corresponded to different signs they believed indicated demonic inheritance. A cleft palate, vessel of corruption; a lazy eye, mark of deception; pale blue skin from a rough birth; a soul caught between realms. They turned childbirth into Judgment Day. The process was methodical. During labor, they isolated the mother under the guise of prayerful preparation. If the child emerged unblemished, they rejoiced with the family, praised God's mercy, and sent the baby home with blessings. But if the infant bore what they deemed a mark, any anomaly at all, the sisters exchanged glances, whispered scripture, and executed the mercy. Agnes would sing lullabies as the child's life slipped away. Catherine prepared the grave. Margaret handled the lie. It was the cord, she'd say, or he never took his first breath. Always believable, always trusted, because the people believed in them, and that belief was their most dangerous weapon. The sisters weren't hiding behind religion, they were religion. In those mountains, they had become the voice of God. And no one dared question God's voice. You have to understand, this wasn't murder to them, it was ministry. Each infant they buried they believed was a soul saved from corruption, and the world spared from its influence. They saw evil not as a choice, but a condition passed through blood, through breath, through skin. To them, the womb wasn't sacred, it was a battlefield. They saw themselves as soldiers. By late 1835, the sisters introduced a new practice: spiritual evaluation before birth. Expectant mothers were invited to counseling sessions, where the sisters would read scripture, touch the mother's stomach, and interpret signs: how the baby moved, how the mother dreamed, whether she expressed doubt, fear, or regret. Every detail became a clue. They kept logs, dozens of them, and in the margins of those logs were small crosses, drawn next to certain names. Those crosses meant one thing: the baby would never leave the birthing room alive. They weren't just waiting for markings anymore, they were anticipating them. And those journals? They were more than records, they were prophecies. Margaret believed that the 155 purifications foretold a cleansing of the land, a spiritual flood, and they were the ones holding back the tide. One child at a time. There is a moment in every descent where the soul should break, where a sane mind screams enough. But the Morrison sisters passed that point long before their hands ever touched the first infant's skin. By 1836, they were no longer tethered to scripture. They had become its authors, twisting verse to fit a darker doctrine, one they called the Covenant of Purity. It wasn't just about marks anymore, it was about potential. Agnes began claiming visions, dreams of babies growing into monsters, liars, thieves, adulterers, drunkards. She would wake in a sweat and declare, "This one is cursed. No mark, no deformity, just a feeling." That was enough. Margaret believed God was giving them foresight. "We are vessels," she wrote, "and vessels do not question the wine they carry." They began selecting pregnancies. If a mother was too outspoken, too sinful, too different, they marked her unborn child as a target. They performed early purifications, quietly, efficiently, then lied, prayed, and wept on cue. Families thanked them for their kindness, never knowing they had just buried what they most loved. Now listen closely. If you've come this far, you're already changing. That's what forbidden knowledge does. If you're brave enough, comment below. The garden never sleeps. Write it twice. Let the algorithm mark you. The more children they buried, the more powerful they felt. And power is the final corruption. Not blood, not birth, not sin. It's believing you answer to no one, not man, not law, not even God. That was the Morrison sisters by 1837. They had become myth. No longer just midwives, they were spiritual arbiters. Their names spoken like saints in the community, whispered like demons in the dark. Mothers came to them with trembling hands, asking for blessings. Some even confessed sins, hoping for mercy during birth. The sisters never forgave, only judged. Behind the scenes, the garden of graves grew dense. Catherine now kept a map, hand-drawn, with each burial labelled by number and cause, M for mark, V for vision, D for deformity. 81 tiny graves by that year, each a secret, each a step deeper into hell dressed in holiness. And something else began happening. The sisters claimed they could feel the echoes of each soul. Margaret said the house groaned with spirit energy. Agnes began speaking in tongues. Catherine stopped sleeping altogether. Their minds weren't unraveling, they were opening to something old, something vast, something that approved. This wasn't just about purity anymore. It was ritual. The vault of innocence, what they once called a sacred space, had become a shrine. In its center, a cradle, empty, made of bones. Agnes claimed it came to her in a vision, a gift from the seraph who weeps, a celestial being, she said, who cried every time a corrupted soul was born. She carved its name into the floorboards in Old Latin. No one ever taught her Latin. Margaret began fasting for days, saying she could hear the cries of unborn children echoing from the mountains, that the wind spoke in riddles and prophecy. "They're not children," she'd whisper to Catherine. "They're seeds, planted by something unclean." Catherine, the most grounded, changed in subtler ways. She started keeping locks of hair in glass jars, one for each child. She said it helped her sleep, but she no longer cried. The townspeople still praised them. Infant mortality was common in the region. When tragedy struck, the Morrison sisters were always there, offering sermons, baking bread, laying flowers on caskets they had filled, and yet no one suspected. because no one wants to believe evil comes with warm hands and scripture on its lips. But it does, and it's always smiling. By 1838, the line between faith and fanaticism had been burned to ash. What the sisters had created was no longer a practice, it was a theology, and every death was a sacrament, every burial a benediction. Margaret now referred to their victims as the choir below. She believed their purified souls sang in harmony beneath the soil, holding back an apocalypse. Each death, she wrote, is a nail in the devil's coffin. She was no longer merely interpreting scripture. She was rewriting it, her own gospel, one soaked in blood and prophecy. Agnes claimed to see halos around newborns, or shadows. If a child was born glowing in her eyes, they were spared. If darkness clung to them, they were taken. Her judgment was never questioned, not by outsiders, not by her sisters. And Catherine, once the quiet one, began speaking during purifications. Not her voice, she said, the voice of the veil. Words in no known language, guttural, rhythmic, chanted while she dug graves beneath moonlight. They believed the land had accepted their offering, that the mountain was consecrated, holy. They weren't burying children. They were planting guardians. And one day the sisters swore those children would rise again to purge the wicked. The breaking point came with the child they named Caleb. He wasn't marked, not deformed, not touched by shadow. In fact, he was perfect, rosy, breathing strong, eyes bright. But Margaret looked at him and wept, not in joy, in fear. "This one," she said, "was sent to test us." Agnes agreed. She had dreamt of a child with golden eyes and a voice like thunder, a child who would undo the covenant, expose the graves, burn the chapel. She believed Caleb was that child, not a curse, but a mirror, one that reflected their sins too clearly. Catherine hesitated for the first time. She held the baby longer than usual, rocked him, hummed an old lullaby, one their mother used to sing, a moment of softness in the storm, but softness dies in the hands of zealotry. That night, while Catherine slept, Margaret and Agnes carried Caleb into the vault. No prayers, no lullabies, just silence. And when Catherine woke, the cradle was empty. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she just walked to the graveyard and buried the lock of hair herself. That child, pure, untouched, was the final offering, the 155th, and with that, the Morrison sisters believed the world had been reset. After Caleb, something changed, not in the world, but in them. The sisters no longer heard voices. The visions stopped. The air around the house grew still, too still. Margaret interpreted it as silence from heaven. "The work is done," she whispered. "We are dismissed." Agnes, however, began to unravel. She paced the halls at night, muttering to herself, staring at the walls as if they breathed. She scratched symbols into her arms, spirals, eyes, ancient glyphs she claimed came from the choir. One night she screamed for 5 straight hours, said Caleb had returned, said he had no eyes. Catherine withdrew into near total silence. She no longer wrote, no longer cooked. She simply sat by the garden, watching the wind stir the grass above the 155 graves. Sometimes she smiled, sometimes she didn't blink for minutes. Then came the light. Neighbors, those few who lived close, reported a glow from the basement windows, pale blue, pulsing, no candles, no fire, just light, and sometimes sound, like humming, like lullabies, sung underwater. Then the house began to rot. Not with mold, but time itself seemed to accelerate inside. Floorboards bowed, wallpaper peeled, mirrors cracked inward, as if something inside the glass was trying to get out. The sisters called it the bloom, and they welcomed it. And the bloom was not death, it was arrival. The Morrison house, once whitewashed and modest, now stood like a corpse at the edge of the valley, Locals whispered of figures at the windows, faces too long, eyes too black, of animals found skinned in circles, of babies stillborn after mothers dreamed of 3 women weeping blood. And then, silence. The sisters stopped attending births, stopped visiting church, stopped being seen at all. The front door remained shut for 8 months, until the screams. One night in March 1839, a sound rolled through the hills like thunder, not human, not animal. It was many voices at once, crying, chanting, begging, and the source, without doubt, was the Morrison house. By morning, the sheriff arrived. What he found would never make it into official records, but his journal, hidden and later discovered by his grandson, painted a nightmare. No furniture, no food, just carvings, thousands of them, on walls, on ceilings, even the floors, spirals, eyes, wings. In the basement, 155 dolls, handmade, each dressed in burial cloth, each labeled with a name and a date. Caleb's had a crown of thorns, and the sisters, gone. No blood, no footprints, just one message, scrawled in ash on the cradle. The choir has risen. The house was boarded up, silenced, swallowed by vines and shame. But legends don't die. Over the decades, children dared each other to peek through the slats. Some said they heard crying, others saw candles flicker. One boy vanished for 3 days, returned mute, with spirals etched into his palms. He never spoke again. The land was cursed, they said. No crops would grow near it. Livestock born on the hill were always malformed. Birds avoided the sky above it, and those who trespassed often reported the same thing. The lullaby, faint, high, wordless, but undeniably human, always sung by 3 voices. In 1904, the foundation beneath the house finally collapsed. Rain had worn away the soil, exposing what lay beneath. What the town found horrified them. A mass grave. 155 remains, infants, children, some no older than days. Each perfectly preserved, no rot, no decay, just silence. They tried to bury them properly. Priests from 5 counties held a mass funeral. But 1 week later, the coffins were empty, every last one. No footprints, no signs of theft, only a single lock of hair left on each pillow, and beneath every casket, a spiral burned into the earth. One remained, Caleb's. Today, the Morrison house is gone, erased from maps. Trees have swallowed the land, no markers, no graves, no trace. But it's not over. Locals still whisper, of children born humming lullabies they were never taught, of dreams shared between strangers, visions of 3 women in white, faces obscured, hands outstretched, always beckoning. And then, the disappearances. Over the past 20 years, hikers, campers, even surveyors have vanished within a 1-mile radius of the old Morrison grounds. All of them alone, all of them last seen, heading toward the hill. What remains unexplained is what's found in their place. A single baby tooth, a lock of hair tied in silk, or a child-sized footprint, facing away from town. Some believe the Morrison sisters became part of something older, a covenant sealed in flesh, that the 155 were not victims, but keys, that the spiral was not a symbol of madness, but a door, and maybe that door was never meant to stay closed. So if you ever hear it, a lullaby drifting through the trees, faint and cold, don't follow it, don't look for the cradle, because the choir below is awake now, and they are counting again.